Fantastic. Good morning, everyone. Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Actually, no, this isn't, I've been fobbing him off. I've been trying to get to this event for years. I finally, all the stars aligned. And then, I then also agreed to speak at another event. I'm speaking, I think I'm only doing like 3 events this whole like conference season. Like conferences tend to be like in the autumn and in the spring. I'm speaking like 3 events and 2 of them end up on the same day because I'm an idiot, right? So that notwithstanding, I want to talk to you about some stuff this morning. In particular, let's see if this is going to work. Yes, right, okay. Check the tech. Brilliant. Right, this is not a technical talk. This is a thinking talk with technology in. My goal this morning is to give you some tools to help you see what's right in front of you. A lot of the problem we have in organisations, right, okay, let's just quick show of hands. I was just seeing Eddie opening this, and he's asking people to put their hands up. And you are people who put your hands up, and that's brilliant. Because if you ever speak in somewhere like Denmark or Sweden, and you go, do you want to put your hands up? And they'll go, and they're not being rude, it's just cultural. No, we don't put our hands up, you do talking. So, who here is technical? Who does technical stuff? Right, okay, brilliant. About a good quarter of you, maybe a third of you. And who's more on the kind of processy side of Agile and Lean? Okay, fab. Right, okay. Then I may have the right talk. So what I want to do here is think about why we do what we do and think about why it's so hard to get people to do new things. Okay. So why do we do what we do? And this is, you go into, I'm a consultant. I've been in tech for about 30 years. Amazing skin, right? But I've been in tech for a long time. And a lot of that, 20 odd years of that was programming, like hands-on coding. I still try and cut code when I can, but I don't get to do that very often. And then I got really interested in how teams build software, and then how organizations build teams, and so on, and kind of scaling out. But to me, it's all sort of aspects of the same puzzle. It's like trying to figure out how work works. So one of the things I started looking at was, why is it so difficult to kind of bring people on what seems to be a fairly obvious win, right? And the main reason we do what we do is out of habit. We do it because we just do it, and we do it, and we do it again. And so a lot of change, a lot of introducing new things, is changing habits. And in fact, we were talking about this over breakfast. You can't go up to someone and change a habit. I don't know if any of you have ever struggled with like biting your nails, or when it gets a bit more serious, things like eating disorders and all this kind of stuff, where there's compulsive behaviour. You can't make someone stop that. That thing is a presenting symptom of something else, and it's meeting a need. And the point is to try and understand what that need is. And if you can meet that need a different way, the habit falls away. Because we're fundamentally lazy, right? And this is biological, this is evolutionary. We're lazy because we need to be able to focus on stuff, right? And the less stuff we have to focus on, the more we can focus on the tiger running at us, or the deer running away that's going to be our lunch, yeah? So if we get a new habit that's a healthier thing to do that meets that need, then the other thing drops away. So we need to look at habits. Another thing I hear, what I'm doing is because it's obviously right. And obviously right is often about received wisdom. We've always, I've only seen this, I've heard it's obviously right. I can't imagine another way of doing it, therefore this one's obvious. This is the way I was taught, right? Why do you deploy your code in that way? Why do you make this huge, why every time I say to you, can you write a really simple web endpoint that's going to receive a message and send a message, you crank out frameworks and tools and blah. Well, that's the way I was taught. Right? I need these 7,000 classes before I write the 2 lines of code that you wanted, because I don't know how to do that any other way. Everyone else does it this way. No one got fired for, these days, buying AWS. Right? It used to be IBM. Right? and then the one I hear a lot, that we've always done it this way. So one of my absolute heroes, right? The legend that is Admiral Grace Hopper. So she, if you haven't come across Grace Hopper, I'll be surprised, but if you haven't come across Grace Hopper, she was an admiral in the US Navy in the mid 20th century, and she taught the US military how to computer, right? So she invented the compiler because she needed one. So there's an awful lot of stuff. So there's a wonderful, it's a Letterman interview with her, where saying, so you were leading this computing thing because you're an expert, right? She says, no, there were no experts. we were making this up. I just happened to get the job of making it up. And she uses this lovely phrase. She says, the most dangerous phrase you can say is, we've always done it that way. And she was talking about what they call DP managers, data processing managers, but trying to get them to think differently. So, okay, some ideas age well, right? Unix. Unix and I are about the same age. We're in our mid-50s. The first time I ever saw VI, the editor, was in 1987. That's like the granddaddy of Vim. I remember I used to work at ThoughtWorks in the 2000 noughts. And I was sitting there pairing with this young lad, and he said, "Wow, you really know your way around Vim, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, well, I've been using it for, wait, how old are you?" There's like a Rubicon where you go, yeah, I've literally been using this before you were born. And it's everywhere. If you have any kind of mobile device, it's got a Unix on it. If you have a TV at home, it's probably got a Unix on it, right? Your laptops now have a Unix. Even Windows has Unix on it. Theory of constraints. Lean operations, Goldratt. This stuff has aged really well. He was writing this in the 80s. We still have, I suspect a bunch of people in this room use Goldratt's ideas on a daily basis with their clients inside their companies. Some not so much, okay? And I want to look at a couple of those this morning. SOLID. Anyone here who's an advocate for SOLID who thinks it's a brilliant idea? Don't be afraid. Okay. So, he's on stage and he's going to talk about. Okay, so SOLID, I'm going to talk about a bit. I think again was a great idea. Hasn't aged well. Scrum. Ooh. Ooh. I think was a great idea. Hasn't aged well. But so why does everyone do this? And the answer is because they do, right? Because they do. Because they don't. Put your hands up if you've been in this business, in this industry for less than 30 years. Less than 30 years. I'm going to go practically everybody, right? Scrum has always existed. You have never been in an industry where Scrum did not exist. You don't know the before times. Yeah. Likewise, SOLID has been around for 20 odd years. So what do I mean by aging well? So I'm going to channel Ellie Goldratt here. I did a series of talks actually a few years ago about this. So this is called Beyond the Goal. So he wrote this book, The Goal, in early 80s, and it's a lovely story. It's a business novel, and he wrote the first management novel, and it's a story about this guy called Alex, and Alex works in a factory, and the factory's going down the tubes, and Alex's marriage is on the rocks, and it's all going wrong for Alex, and he's given 30 days to turn this factory around, or they're going to shut it down, and he's like, oh no, and he bumps into an old school teacher, and the school teacher starts asking him. It's wonderful. It's what's called Socratic dialogue. So Socratic dialogue, he doesn't give him the answers, he asks him the questions that provoke him to figure it out for himself, which is brilliant. It's a great way of coaching. And so the whole book is basically these Socratic questions to lead Alex to figure out how to fix his organisation. And as a reader, it's brilliant, because you get the question and you're like, oh, I know, and you turn the page and you go, yes, right? Or sometimes you turn the page and you go, oh, well, and you've just had that moment, which is really cool. So he wrote this book, and he really struggled to get the book published, because does it go in the fiction section or does it go in the management section? And eventually he got it published. This book is actually a series of lectures he gave 25 years later. He said, right, I've been doing this for a quarter of a century, here's what I've learned. A series of 8 lectures, it's brilliant. And the whole hook for this is this one phrase: technology can bring benefits if and only if it diminishes a limitation. What does that mean? He says basically to understand, to really exploit a technology, you need to ask 4 questions, or you need to answer 4 questions. And without answering these 4 questions, you're going to adopt this technology, but you're not going to get anything from it. So you get things like, he was talking about MRP and ERP, these big enterprisey type systems that became really fashionable. Loads of companies bought them, and most of them didn't get any benefit at all. So they shelled out millions, often tens of millions, to big consultancies, SAP and Oracle and IBM and all these folks, to bring these huge systems in, and got 0 benefit because they didn't know how to change what they were doing to benefit from the system. So 4 questions. First question, what's the power of the technology? This is the easy bit, right? This is read the brochure, right? Listen to the salesperson. That's the power of the technology. This thing, ERP, will help you see all of your business information together, right? You've never had that before. Oh, that's cool. This is the important bit. What limitation does that diminish? Well, for something like ERP, it diminishes the limitation that people can only make local decisions. So your salespeople are making sales decisions, your tech people are making tech decisions, your operations people, because the amount of time it takes to move information around a large organization can be weeks or months. And so this is where cost accounting comes from, is that the salespeople just focus on maximizing revenue, because that's what salespeople do. The IT folks Well, we're not making money, apparently. You know, they don't understand value chain, so we're not making money, so the best we can do is reduce cost. So we'll call ourselves a cost center, and good IT means costing less, right? And so on, yeah? And so ERP said, look, you can look at the whole organization as a complete composite thing and make decisions. And they went, brilliant, we're not going to do that. And so then question 3, what rules enabled us to manage this limitation? And so again, we can look at ERP and we can say, well, cost accounting enables us to manage this. We know we can't know. We know that in real time, the salespeople cannot know what's coming down the pipe from technology because they don't talk to each other. You know, they have monthly steering meetings, right? So we know we don't know that, so we're going to have to make some stuff, make some decisions in order to make that work. And so we're going to need to take those rules away and introduce new rules to exploit this thing. And again, I've got loads of, well, several versions of this talk online where I go into this for a bunch of examples. As I was putting this talk together about thinking, it occurred to me it's kind of like a companion to this. Because what Goldrat's 4 questions are about are point in time. For me now, adopting a technology, what benefits will it bring? What limitations does it diminish? What rules do I need to change? I want to look at this over time. So let's assume that we know the power of the technology and we know the limitations it diminishes and we've adopted it, whatever it is, right? ERP, solid, less, safe, whatever. The next question is this. We adopted it at a point in time. What's changed since? How has that limitation changed over time? Right? Which means, is that decision that we made back then for all the right reasons, is it still valid? Does it still make sense? And the other question then, the kind of a fairly obvious follow-up question is, what should we be doing instead? Right? So, what limitation does the technology diminish? Well, it helps to understand the context. We need to figure out what was going on. And the way we understand context is we talk to old people. Right? Talk to old people who were there, right? I'm old people, talk to me. Right? But this isn't like, I'm not gatekeeping. What I'm saying is the more old people you talk to, the more people who were there you talk to, the more likely you are to build up a profile of what was going on there. And remember that old people have different stories, right? So don't just talk to one old people and don't believe any single source. Don't believe me, right? This is a weird thing to say in the middle of your own talk, right? Don't take my word for it. Go and check other people. And if you start hearing things corroborating, it's likely that they're more likely to be true. This is how you source news, right? Have multiple sources of news. So let's take a look then when good advice turns bad. Let me take an example. So SOLID, who's come across SOLID? Let's just get a show of hands. Okay, so quite a few of you haven't. All right, so SOLID this is probably around 2010 or so, maybe a bit earlier, 2008. A chap called Robert Martin, who's one of the Agile Manifesto signatories. In fact, he was the guy that got everyone together at Snowbird to have the weekend where they came up with the manifesto. The manifesto wasn't the plan. The plan was just to get a bunch of people together and see what happened, and what happened was the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. So he's been around this for a long time, and he's very into craftsmanship, and he's quite macho and kind of the uber bro grammar, and I'm not a big fan of that stuff. But he came up with a bunch of principles, he called them, the principles for clean code. And he wrote this book. And I took this book on holiday a couple of years ago because I've been quite rude about SOLID for a while. I hadn't actually read clean code. And I read clean code and I thought, okay, this is great. It was terrible. It's a really, I'm sorry, but I'm saying this out loud. It's a really, there was lots of, I made notes in my Kindle and I was like, oh really? Oh no, oh no. This is very Java-centric. And there were some I agree with, and there's one chapter that I think is brilliant that was contributed by someone else. Anyway, I want to just look at one of these principles, single responsibility principle. Okay, I think I've got longer than that. I'm not sure. I should probably speed up then. Fab. That's what I get. Hooray. So single responsibility principle says this: a class should only have one reason to change or serve one actor. Sounds reasonable, right? And then he says, gather together the things that change for the same reasons and separate things that change for different reasons. I'm like, that also makes sense, okay? And then he says this: the role of an accountant is different from the role of a database administrator. At this point, I start scratching my head because this is what I call a category error here. So an accountant typically in a technical system is a user, is a consumer of that system. A DBA is going to be like a part of the people building this system. So if you said like, an accountant is different from a salesperson or different from a support person, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. But he's kind of munging all these people together. And then he says this. There's quite a lot of words here, but it's really quite important. He says, this is the reason we don't put SQL in JSPs. So for those of you under 100, JSP, Java Server Pages, was part of enterprise Java around the 2000s, where you had HTML with Java code in it. So apparently it's fine to put Java code in HTML, but not SQL code. And again, I don't really understand why that's a thing. And he says, this is why we do not generate HTML in the modules that compute results, because they're separate things. Generating HTML is presentation, computing results is business logic. And we have business rules should not know the database schema. And I'm like, okay. And this is the reason we separate concerns. And again, let's look at what was true at the time. So here's some code. For the non-programmers, what this does is it prints a report. Okay? And the way it does that, it gets some data. And then it does a calculation, and then it renders the results of that calculation. So if you can see your way past the punctuation there, that's what we're doing. And so what SRP says is those should be in different places, okay? They should be separate places, different bits of the code. And we pull those things out and do them separately. Why? Why not put the stuff together that belongs together? And it turns out, if you look back in time, that they were different people doing that work. It's often different teams, sometimes different parts of the organization, sometimes different organizations. There were the DBAs doing the data stuff, and if you wanted to get any data changes made, you had to sacrifice the chickens and put in the requests and wait the 6 months and whatever else. Like schema changes were like sacred. And then you had the business logic folks, in the back room, basically, the stained t-shirts and a bit smelly. And then you had the UI folks, the designers, with their cool hats the wrong way round and weird haircuts and stuff. And that's what you had. And it made sense to have the code in separate places, because the one thing you didn't want is to have everyone tromping all over each other's code in the same file. But then what happens? Time passes. Those people start to assemble into the same teams. We get these cross-functional teams. And so now they're sitting together, but still working in different parts of the world. And then roll it forward another 10 years or so, and they're the same person. They're our full stack, multilingual, whatever, polyglot programmers, right? Everything as code. And database migrations, database changes are now written as code. And you get things like Rails and Node.js and whatever, where you've got the same language right there through the stack. And so then what happens? Then a change comes in. Can we add a field to this report? Okay. Sure, we can add a field to the report. So to add a field to the report, I need to make a database change. I need to put some business logic in, and I need to render it on the screen. Okay, so I do need to touch all these different places, except now they're in different places. So basically, I've just got a load of admin to do, right? Can we change the precision of this value? Anyone who's worked on anything financial or numerical, that's not a rendering thing, right? To change the precision, I've got to figure out every single number that's involved in that calculation, work out how many digits I need for those to make sure that the result is correct to that precision. That's schema changes, that's data changes, that's calculation changes, and it's rendering changes. Again, all the way through the stack. Why is it a problem now and it wasn't before? Well, because before, that request would never have made it to the team. It would have been broken out by someone way out there in terms of a high-level design, detailed design, and what would have happened was the database guy would have received the "can you make these table changes?" and the business logic lady would have been like, "can you go and make this calculation with this new schema stuff?" And she'd have said, "Yep, sure." And you go and hang out with the hipster designers and so on. So we didn't ask the question in this way. Can we change that? So what we've got now is admin. We've got stuff everywhere, which is a bit frustrating. So now let's take a look then. The logical conclusion of this is Rails. Okay, Ruby on Rails. This thing here, you can't really see it on this screen. This is a directory layout. Rails has around a bare Rails. If you go Rails new, a bare new Rails project with nothing in it, no functionality yet, has over 50 directories with over 60 files in those directories. It has things like we've got channels, controllers, helpers, more controllers. This is great because look, here you've got concerns, and here you've got concerns. So they've separated concerns, so that's good. And this is the abridged version, right? So let's take a look at this. What does separation of concerns mean? Who's heard this phrase, separation of concerns? Probably most of us, right? We've come across the idea of separation of concerns. It turns out it's from a paper by a guy called Edgar Dijkstra, who invented a load of stuff we do, called On the Role of Scientific Thought, which sounds really dry. It's actually a brilliant read. And it's quite short. It's only about 6-7 pages long. Really worth reading. And in it, he talks about how you get work done. And so who thinks, for the technical folks, actually for everyone, who thinks that something like getting data out of a database and rendering it on a screen are separate concerns? Do they sound like separate concerns to you? Yeah? No one putting their hand up? No? Yeah, a couple of folks going, of course they're separate concerns, you fool. So, not quite. When Dijkstra's talking about separation of concerns, he says, for him it's a holistic property of a system. So, for instance, correctness is a concern, and efficiency is a concern, how fast it is. He said, so that's what he means about separating concerns. Whether you're going to make it be correct or whether you're going to make it be fast are separate things. And he says this lovely phrase. He says, being one and multiple track-minded simultaneously. So while you're focusing on making it correct, be aware that it also needs to be fast, or at least fast enough. So just have that in mind, and so on. Yeah. And then he says this. He says, the task of making a thing satisfying our needs, so building the thing, is split into two parts. Stating the properties, like what does it need to look like, and making the thing that has those properties. Okay? And then he says business data systems are sufficiently complicated, lovely understatement. They're sufficiently complicated to need us to separate defining it and building it, which is kind of what we do. We do the analysis piece and we do the kind of building piece, and we try and integrate those. So I'm like, well, that's not what I've heard separation of concerns as. I've heard separation of concerns as, your layered architecture, 3-layer, NT or whatever it is, microservices splitting things out. That's separation of concerns. No, it's not. That's just how you arrange code. Okay. So then I thought, what if we actually separated concerns? And what if we separated the concern of behavior versus code structure? Right? So behavior is one concern, but it doesn't matter where the code is as long as it works. And then where I put the code is a separate concern. Right? And so I have a different approach from SRP, which says place all these things in different places. I say keep everything together, glom it into the same code place while it fits in your head. Fits in your head is a pattern I've been using for a decade or so. Fits in your head is the you whose head I'm thinking of. You understand the language, you understand its idioms, you understand its tool chain, you understand its ecosystem. So you are deeply versed in the language and in the domain as well. You know stuff. So given that, where should the code live? And we keep all the code together until it doesn't fit in your head anymore, by which point it will sort of separate out itself. And you'll go, oh, that bit belongs over here. So what I end up with is I do genuinely gather together things that change together. So instead of having like reports where I've got the view stuff here and the logic stuff here and the data stuff here, I'll have a bunch of little sub-reports that are complete batteries included sub-reports. And you can take any of those and make them do stuff, right? So I assume that programmers are polyglot. I assume that I get self-contained little units. Okay. So what we've got by shifting forward 30 odd years is a totally different looking code base. And again, why are we still doing SOLID? Because we've always done it that way. Yeah. I'll leave the others as an exercise. I wrote an article a while back on my blog, dannorth.net, Cupid the Backstory, which is kind of, it's a gentle dig at, but sort of, seriousness in comedy and all that. Looking at each of these 5 principles and why I'm not a fan. Okay, the one other example I want to look at this morning is Scrum. Okay, let's take a look at Scrum. So it starts in the early 90s, right? And as with anything, I've got starts, I've put a little star there. Any good idea starts in multiple places simultaneously, okay? So this is my origin story. My origin story involves this lady. Does anyone here know Martine DeVos? Because you should. She's amazing, right? So she's this Belgian engineer. She was working in the education department, so public sector, big, huge, slow-moving projects in the early 90s, and she was cross, and you don't want to see Martine cross. Right? she's a piece of work. I'm a massive fan of this lady. And so she turned around to her team and she said, right, I'm done. I'm done with this multi-year nonsense where it all goes in a big pot and we deliver the wrong thing. We're going to deliver something in 12 weeks And we're going to pause halfway. We're going to sprint to the halfway mark, and then we're going to sprint to the finish. That's where the idea of sprints came from. And so we're not just flying blind for 12 weeks. And at 12 weeks, we're going to ship something. And her team just looked at her like she was completely insane. Right? It was impossible to ship things in 12 months. And she's going, no, we're going to ship something in 12 weeks. And so they did. They got into this thing, and they worked for 12 weeks, and a checkpoint halfway through. And at the end of 12 weeks, they shipped something. And it was tiny, and it was rubbish, but it was non-zero. And then the next quarter, because you're talking a quarter at a time here, the next quarter, they did the same thing again. Another sprint, another release. And it was less rubbish and less small. And over time, they managed to get the hang of this thing. Now, just to put this in context, you're saying we're going to do one release a season, right? Was considered impossible. And so all these novel practices emerge in order to make this possible. So the sprint itself, instead of having like a 2-year Gantt chart project plan thing, you've got a 6-week mini project. You plan out just a 6-week project as though that's the only thing that's ever going to happen. These huge, enormous Gantt charts with resource leveling and linkages and whatever, they're just a sprint plan. You know, the sprint plan is what are we going to do for the next 6 weeks? Multi-month features. So to get a feature written, a feature would have been a big chunk of change, would have gone from team to team to team, exactly like that SRP picture. You'd have had the data folks working on that for months, and then the systems people working on it for months, and then eventually it would get through, and so on. And it would go around the building, and best part of a year later, it lands back again. And she's like, that's not going to work. We need to make these a complete item you can deliver within 6 weeks. And so, well, how do we do steering then? Steering we do every month. We get everyone together and we say, where are we going? Well, if we do that on a 6-week sprint, that's 1, right? Possibly 2. So what if we did it every week? Well, that's still only 6. You know, a 2-year project, you've got 24. What if we did it every day? What if we did a daily, tiny little mini steering thing? I've just invented the stand-up, right? So it's not, and this is what everyone gets wrong. It's so frustrating. A stand-up isn't looking backwards. It isn't what we've done. It's looking forwards. It's saying what's left. Right? If your stand-ups are not looking forwards and saying what's left, you're doing it wrong. Okay? And then these BRDs, these huge BRDs, anyone's been involved with BRDs, it's soul-crushing. And instead we just get this little backlog of things we want to do. And then we've got these huge handoffs, and no, we just get this cross-functional development team, bring it all together, get stuff done. Okay? And this was magic. Right? This was really revolutionary. So, delivering within a quarter, that was completely impossible. Getting hold of hardware, getting a server could take like 6 months, yeah? And then getting it provisioned. I've got the server, I haven't got anything on it yet. I get it actually ready to use, there's another bunch of weeks. Compiling code, anyone was using C++ in the 90s. So C++, you can compile relatively quickly. There's then a thing called linking. And linking can take hours. So your tiny little change takes hours to build. So if your build takes hours, what do? You put more in each build. And so you get bigger batches, exponentially more risk of failure, etc. Right? So this picks up and this takes off. And so 2 of the originators of Scrum, Ken and Jeff, write the guide because they want people to be able to use this thing. And they introduce this certification model because that means that if you get someone in who has done it, who's worked with the people who've done it, then that's a good way to legitimize it. And then it explodes. Right? And then it explodes. It takes over the world. It's literally $1 billion certification industry. I've done the maths. Okay, and it's just eclipsed all the other agile methods, which is heartbreaking because other agile methods are things like Crystal and DSDM and adaptive and feature-driven and XP, and some brilliant ideas. And they all got washed away, and we just get Scrum. Okay, and then Scrum becomes synonymous with agile. And then time passes. Okay, so what's happened since? Well, since then, the technology landscape has changed beyond any possible recognition. Okay, so languages compile underneath my fingertips while I'm typing. Java, C#, Go, all these languages are insanely fast. Continuous delivery. Okay, continuous delivery. I can go from source code check-in to tested running system, completely automated pipe. Procurement and provisioning is in the cloud now. It's a credit card and it's seconds. I can spin up thousands of servers in minutes, and they're not even my servers. And then I can switch them all off again. And then, I've got my deployment, my channels. So I've got the web, I've got mobile. I can iterate very, very quickly. If I mess something up, I can fix forward in minutes. Yeah. And so here's what happened. Scrum moved the game from years to months and weeks, which was amazing. The problem is that's what it's optimized for. So now it moves the game from minutes to months and weeks, right? And so if you're doing Scrum and your competitors are doing let's get some work done, right, they're going to eat your lunch, yeah? And so it solves really for problems that no longer exist, except where they do. There are still some shops that are, stuck in the 90s. And even then, I would suggest it's not a good first step. We know a lot more now than we knew in the early 90s. So what can we do instead? Here's what we could do instead. I believe in 2 planning cadences, right? This is in big companies, in big organizations. Quarterly, which is done with OKRs, and right now. If I learn something right now that materially affects what we're doing, we should just change it right now. We shouldn't wait for the next sprint planning thing in 2 weeks' time or whatever. Quarterly, a quarter is long enough to do a bit of damage, right? But short enough that in corporate terms it passes in a blink. Yeah? And so we can really, really set ourselves, we can get everyone behind a common direction quarterly. I'm a big fan of what's called big room planning, so get everyone involved in the room, get them to self-select into the work. Again, this is something that SAFe has stolen and corrupted, because what SAFe does is it takes a bunch of people, puts them into teams, and then it solves 2 problems. The first problem is how to slice up the work into the teams, which is a hard problem with loads of dependencies. And the much harder problem is how to weave all that work together again out the back end and turn it into product, which is insane because you don't need to have that problem. Instead, take all of the demand and all the people and put them in a bag and shake it up and let them figure out how the best thing is to do. And that might mean that every quarter your team setup changes, and it might mean every quarter it doesn't. But you let the demand side inform the supply side and you get work done. Organise teams around anticipated demand. So it's as fluid as the demand is dynamic. So if the demand changes enormously, I was working in a bank where they had 2 sites, London and New York, and in London it was basically the same stuff again and again and again, Java, Scala, banking systems, you could have given anything to anyone right by and large. In the US they had 30 or 40 totally independent stovepipe systems built over the last several decades in, you name a technology since the 1960s, and the answer is yes, right? And it turns out that you can't get a bunch of fungible feature teams and just throw work at them that involves the stuff that only Shelby knows, because she's the last person standing because everyone else has been laid off around her and she's holding up this system that's keeping the bank going, right? And she's in a different team with a different backlog because Scrum. Yeah, so now everyone's blocked on everyone. And we said, well, why not bring the people to the work who can do the work? And they went, are we allowed to do that? So, yes, you are. Whoa. And then we separate deployment from release. So deployment is a technical decision. We can do continual deployment. As soon as I've got to change, it's in a production where in an environment where I can test it out. Release is then the commercial decision to make something available to people. And then finally, as I said earlier, daily steering is about what's left, not what's done. Okay, we're always looking forward. Are we nearly there yet? With respect, I don't care what you did. I trust you. You're grown-ups, right? Hopefully, you're being paid a lot of money, and you should just know what we need to do. What I need to know is what's left and what have we learned since we did this yesterday. Because if we've learned something that's going to make it shorter to get to the goal, brilliant, let's do that thing. I want to do his thing because he's come up with a brilliant idea to get us there sooner. So why do we cling to this obsolete technology then? Part of it's momentum, part of it's mind share, part of it's money. Right? These things accrete over time. Now you end up with this huge, huge inertia. So don't assume malice or greed. I'm talking to myself now because I've been quite outspoken about this. It's just structural inertia. It's just there because it's unbelievably hard to change that, to challenge that. And we have what's called a commitment or consistency bias. If you haven't read Influence by Robert Cialdini, it is utterly brilliant. So he's an ex-advertising guy, and it's basically how advertising messes with you and makes you buy things. It's really good. And he talks about what's called consistency bias, which is this. So do you like your mum? Yes, I do like my mum. Okay. Do you think your mum would like having to cross a really busy road?
No.
Would you like a really busy bypass to be built through this town?
God, no.
No, God no, right? Consistency bias. Because I asked those first 2 kind of priming questions, now she can't then go, I'd love a bypass. It'd be brilliant because there's, if I said, do you like your mum?
Yes.
Yes. Is she fed up with all the traffic jams on all the local streets trying to get around in the morning? Would she like it if there was a nice big road that got all those cars to go away and make it nice and quiet? Right?
Yes.
Oh, there we go. We should build a highway, right? And it's called a consistency bias, and it's a brilliant way to win surveys, right? we did a survey, and everyone likes the Conservatives. Right, so no one got fired for buying. And then what we have, what we call bounded versus centered communities. So a bounded community is someone that guards the edges. So certification is a classic boundary, right? You have a Scrum certification or you don't. In various faiths and religions, what you wear or certain foods you eat or rituals you observe or language you use marks you as inside or outside. And if you look through history, most of the big religious wars have been between factions of the same religion. Right, so if you look at the Catholics and the Protestants in England over the decades or over the centuries, has been pretty hectic, and factions of Islam and whatever else, because they're bounded communities and they see each other as the other. So a centered community has a set of values, core beliefs, and you're either further or nearer from that center, but you're never outside. You can, and wherever you are, you can always move further to the center if you want or further away. But those communities tend to be much more resilient. They last longer over time because it's about keeping the values and communicating the values, and then people can kind of join in and take part in that. So you must think for yourselves. This is Brian from the Life of Brian. He's standing, he opens his door, and there's like hundreds of people in the street going, "You're the Messiah." And he goes, "I'm not the Messiah." He goes, you must think for yourselves. And he goes, "How must we think for ourselves?" He says, "You're all individuals." This one guy says, "I'm not." He says, "Shut up." So look past the Scrum and the solid dogma. Okay, look what's hiding in plain sight. Challenge it, right? Assess your own tools and your own practices and ask yourself, what should we change? What was true that we took this decision because we think it's the right decision? And is it still true? Has stuff changed since? If it has changed since, let's revisit that. The consistency thing is a real bias, and it's really hard to change that. Assess your own tools and practices. Talk to some old people, okay? Remember, I'm old people. Okay, come talk to me. There's a bunch of old people here. It's lovely, anyone? I think old people, anyone who's been doing this for more than about 20 odd years is old. Okay. And I'll leave the last word. I'll leave the last word with Admiral Hopper. The most dangerous phrase you can use is, "We've always done it that way." So thank you very much.